I remembered how much you liked Craddock, Aloysius says, as the servants put a large plate of delicacies in front of me. We're sitting at one of the tables out in the garden, although this one was much smaller than the giant dining room table that we had dined at previously. I did enjoy it, I reply simply, although I can't help but wonder if you have a little book on me where you write down all of your notes and observations on my character for deep study later. In fact, I'd almost wager that you have such a book for everyone you come across. Knowledge is power, after all. Aloysius laughs. It's amazing how someone can change in just a few months. Your whole manner of speech has changed. I wonder if Hieronymous will still recognize you. The blue hair is kind of a giveaway, I tell him, and he looks pleased. So, can I ask why you wanted me to go to Miss Minchin's, or is that an answer that I'm going to have to earn? Is there a reason you're always so hostile towards me, Tori? Aloysius asks. I can only imagine the half-truths that Hieronymous has filled your head with. You tortured me, I practically exclaim. You dragged me as a student into the other world before I was ready, and then you tortured me to see what Hieronymous was like around me. It was a gross invasion of our privacy. And I do apologize for that, he replies. He almost seems sincere, and it throws me off balance for a moment. That was not my greatest moment, Tori. As for the mind probing, you're right. I have no excuse. However, it was not immediately clear to me that you hadn't been in the other world yet, and I certainly wasn't aware that Hieronymous had been coming and going, quite frequently too, without my knowledge. Yes, the magical memory experiments. I snort through my nose. Yes, drop that bomb to try to drive me and Hieronymous apart and never explain it. He never explained it, Aloysius asks, and I just shake my head. Ah, he replies, you know what happened to that other Wildsea girl he was with? We don't need to rehash that. But did you know that he's been working on a way to store your memories as data? I just stare at him blankly. What? He has kept his research very private, even from me, he continues. Violet's death nearly spelled his own. It seems that Hieronymous was so terrified of losing you, of having all of your memories taken, that he was working on a way to back up your memories so that he could restore them, in the event that you ever committed a violation so severe that your memories were taken from you. Or if anyone tried to shield them from me again, I retort, mostly to try to dispel my own shock. Hieronymous had been absolutely furious with me after he found out what happened with Musette, insisting that I could be expelled, but apparently he had been so concerned that I really would do something that would lead to me being expelled that he had already been trying to store my memories to save our life together if such a thing ever occurred. But that doesn't make any sense, I say suddenly. If I lost my memories, I would lose my magic too. What good are my memories of magic if I can't perform it? I wouldn't be able to say, Aloysius says, his face suddenly turning serious. I don't think that I need to tell you, Tori, that this kind of experiment could put the whole magical community in jeopardy. It would be quite a commodity. For the right price, any magical sin could be forgiven, and Hieronymous would become a very wealthy man. But we have these rules for a reason, Tori, to protect our community from being discovered, and this invention of his could throw all of that into chaos. I just stare at him. Reading between the lines, it sounds like you're hinting that Hieronymous could lose his magic over this, if his research was discovered. Most likely, Aloysius replies. However, now that he has taken up my seat, he is afforded noble protections that he would not have previously had. So, wait, is he really a viscount now? I ask him. I thought that there was supposed to be a whole, coronation or something. There was a swearing-in ceremony, Aloysius says with a shrug. Just a formality. It was nothing you would have been invited to participate in anyway, Tori. Most government affairs are extremely dull matters. The liveliest conversation I've seen in years was a debate over farmland taxation. I stare at him. Aloysius seems like he's in a really talkative mood, and I have to take full advantage. You hinted last time we spoke that Potsdam knew about his memory experiment. Tell me more about that. Petunia was the one who gave him the idea, he replies. If a demon ever did come back to steal your memories, how simple would it be to just put them right back in your brain? But Potsdam has her own reason for wanting this power, as I'm sure you know. I shake my head. Hieronymous only told me that her husband lost his magic because he broke his vows cheating with a succubus, and he went on to start a new, non-magical life with a wife and kids and a white picket fence. Potsdam's apparently really bitter about how the whole thing went down. She has very good reason to be, Aloysius says quietly, suddenly looking pensive. Some of which are due to my own transgressions, but that's not a matter we need to concern ourselves with now, Tori. How are you enjoying your lunch? It's very good, I say appreciatively, but it would be even better if you tell me why you want me to go to Miss Minchin's. Aloysius laughs. You are a relentless little thing, aren't you? You brought it up to us in December, I remind him, and then the acceptance letter was dated back in March, but I was never formally expelled until the end of summer. I suddenly feel a pit forming in my stomach, and I cannot help the feeling of pure rage that comes over me. Did you purposely give Ellen that scrying orb? Did you purposely get her expelled to give Potsdam a reason to expel me as well? Because I swear to you, Aloysius, I swear that if I ever find out that you had any role in Ellen's expulsion, I will... Hush, hush, Aloysius warns. This is exactly the kind of thing Hieronymous is wary of. Do not swear, Tori. Not ever. I was so caught up in my own anger that I didn't even realize what I was saying. The language that I had used so naturally growing up was suddenly akin to a death sentence in the magical world. If I made a vow and broke it, I would lose my magic and my memories. I apologize, I say, although it's more to an absent Hieronymous than it is to him. But answer the question. I had absolutely no role in that, he replies. I was actually busy attending to my own affairs, although I did happen to hear about the little portal you created, sending the trapped Wild Seed girl's spirit through the other world. Very risky, Tori, but Potsdam was watching the whole time to make sure nothing went wrong. I knew she was watching. I mutter, more to myself than to him. So why did Potsdam expel me at the end of summer then? That is complicated, Aloysius admits slowly. You see, Tori, we are trying to find someone. Hieronymous did not want to involve you at all, but as I've mentioned before, Potsdam is starting to spiral. The idea of expelling you to help us with this had been floated in the past, but I had always been against it. Potsdam's dismissal of Miss Middleton seemed to have sent her over the edge, and she expelled you without any directive from me. Personally, I was quite furious when Hieronymous informed me of what had occurred. I stare him down. Furious because she expelled me, or furious because she disobeyed you? Both, Aloysius replies, although there is no laughter in his voice now, and I just stare him down. Are you telling me the truth? I ask. Yes, Tori, I think the time for deception is behind us, don't you think? He asks. I feel as though I have always been very clear about what I want. Would you not agree? I'm not sure, I admit hesitantly. I'm still not entirely sure why you and Hieronymous were estranged for years. Aloysius lets out a sigh, and for a moment he really does look like just a weak old man and not the scheming villain that I had always imagined him to be. Tori, I don't know how much Hieronymous has told you, and I won't ask, but this is our history from my perspective. His mother contracted an infection while giving birth to him and died soon after. Although our marriage had also been arranged, she became my first love. Obviously, I wanted nothing to do with the boy that had led to her death. I continued to work in the other world and let him be raised by a series of foster families in the low world. I had a series of other companions, other marriages, but none of them produced any heirs. Eventually, I became involved in let's call it a morally duplicitous project. I assume that you've already learned of the aquarium experiments? Yes, I reply hesitantly. Petunia's husband was involved in the project as well, he replies. It was the wish of some founding families to be able to raise their children in the other world, so we started experimenting. I used Hieronymous as my first subject. As I told you before, he was struck by extreme nightmares, both waking and asleep, and I wiped his mind of the affair and replaced them with happier memories. I had tested you as a means of testing him, to try to gauge if he was using his own memories in this memory experiment of his, but it seems he had no recollection of his previous torments. What about the other children? None of them were promising, he says with a sigh as he shakes his head. We tried many different means, different spells, different herbs, but in the end it seems that the other world is not ready to embrace human children, even with strong magical heritage. Still, Hieronymous did show a lot of promise, and I did try to make more of an effort to be involved in his life after that. He was always looking to impress me, and I was always aloof with him, thinking it would only give him incentive to help push him further. And then he met that girl, Violet. She was a wild seed, and she would bully and mock him relentlessly for trying to live up to my grand vision for him. Eventually, she convinced him to turn his back on his noble status, his family lineage, all of it. They were set to run away together, to disappear into the other world where no one would ever find them, so they could just live out the rest of their days together. He shakes his head. Obviously, that did not end well for them. I don't like the sick feeling that I get in my stomach. Was I always going to be jealous when her name was mentioned? No, it didn't. Hieronymous will never speak of it. They were attacked by goblins, he continues. They recognized Hieronymus's noble bloodline and asked him for a ransom. He had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with me when he renounced me as his father shortly before he left, so when he asked for my aid, I denied it to him. I told him that if he wanted to be an adult, he could figure this out himself. In retribution, they killed her. Hieronymus flew into a rage and was able to escape. He came to me, asking me to assist him with petty notions of revenge, of which I denied him. Instead, I did all I could to cover up her death. I spread the story that she had been a reckless wild sea girl who thought she could survive in the other world and fell victim to her own hubris. Everyone loves a good cautionary tale. Everyone, except Hieronymus, of course. He told me he would never speak to me again and fled to America. I lost contact with him for several months. How old was he? I asked quietly. He was 18 at the time, I believe, Aloysius replies, and I just nod silently as I gesture for him to continue his tale. Even though he hadn't formally finished his education, he had started applying to work at schools. I still wasn't quite sure why. I knew Petunia through her husband. When he applied to work at Iris Academy, she contacted me and I asked her to take him in, to give him a job and to watch over him for me. It was clear he wanted space from me, and I tried my best to keep my distance. But, after a while, it became clear that my own health was growing frail, and it was time for Hieronymus to take up his family responsibilities. A colleague of mine once told me that it was only once he met his wife that he truly felt compelled to take up all the benefits of his title, to provide her with all the privileges and protections that came with it. And so the plan was born. And thus enters me, I say quietly. Yes, Aloysius agrees. Petunia was adamant that the idea would only work if it was someone he had true feelings for. At first we tried connecting him with other teachers, but it was clear that he had no interest in anyone he met. He was still so fixated on grieving Violet's death. I was beginning to give up all hope when Petunia came to me one day. He laughs, a real laugh, like it was the funniest thing he had ever heard in his life. She said, I don't think you'll like to hear this, but I think he might have developed feelings for someone. I had to ask her if she was joking. Then she continued, There's this freshman girl. He seems quite taken with her, and I think she has feelings for him as well. I was absolutely incredulous. But then, when you two were spotted together at the Glen around Thanksgiving, I realized we only had one chance. We took it, and I think I can speak for both of us when I say that we're both very pleased with how things turned out. I opened my mouth and shut it again. There it was, Hieronymus's complicated history with his father, the one he had never revealed to me, laid out at my feet. Struck speechless, Aloysius says with a laugh. It takes a few moments to get my brain and my mouth working, but I still don't know how to process any of what he had just told me. Either he had very carefully rehearsed what he wanted to say, or he was telling me the truth. None of it seemed like a lie, and yet I couldn't think of anything to say. I had to process this more, later, in private. While Aloysius was here, I still needed answers. Why are you telling me this? I asked suddenly. Hieronymus reminded me very recently that trust has to be earned. Aloysius continues, Believe it or not, I do trust you, Tori. You want what's best for Hieronymus, as do I. You want to have a family with him. That's what I want as well. I stare him down and arch an eyebrow. That's all you want? A family? I never had one growing up, he muses. My father was a man with a volatile temper who hit my mother as often as he had a drink in his hand. I was also raised by foster families, but my mother visited as often as she could. My father, apparently, challenged the wrong person to a duel and lost. We were so close to losing all of the titles and status our family had worked so hard to build. My mother could have lost everything. I spent most of my life doing what I could to advance our position, while she spent most of her time locked in her room talking to the walls as if they were her friends. You may not understand this now, Tori, but as you get older, you begin to realize that you miss the things you never had. There's a foreboding sense of loneliness approaching death's doorstep, and I am, sadly, nearing his door. The only family I have left is a son who resents me for treating him no better than my father treated me, and I would very much like to right that wrong. And he can't help but smile to himself. I have seen my colleagues with their grandchildren, and I can't help but admit that I often find myself jealous. So that's why you were so adamant that I have children with him when we first met, I say, putting the pieces together. You want to have grandchildren before it's too late for you to meet them. Precisely, he replies with a sigh. Sadly, you are younger than I would have wanted for a wife in Hieronymus, but I am glad that his heart chose you. You are incredibly mature and capable, Tori. You are naive, and there is much for you to learn yet, but I do believe that you have a willingness to learn, and that, to me, is the most important indicator of quality. I nod to myself, taking this all in. You still never told me why you wanted me to go to Miss Minchin's, I remind him. I think that is something best left for Hieronymus to explain, he says with a sigh. It is ironic that both Petunia and I are finding ourselves at your mercy when for so long you have been the happy byproduct of our schemes. I hesitate for a moment as I look at him, really look at him. He looks honest, and he looks sincere. If I wanted to say that I was a good judge of character, then I had to trust my instincts and what they were telling me. I apologize for treating you harshly in the past, I say quietly. I did not know your history with Hieronymous. He keeps the details of his past very private, and I respect him too much to pry. But I do feel as though you're being honest with me now. If you're lying to me, then, well done. I'm gullible enough to have fallen for it. But if you are telling the truth, I do forgive you, and I am willing to be your friend. Aloysius smiles, and if I'm not mistaken, I can almost see tears in his eyes. I've always wondered what it would be like to have a daughter, he says softly, and I can't help but smirk to try to dispel the emotion bubbling in my own chest as well. Be glad you didn't, I tell him. If you thought that Hieronymous was angsty as a teen, you'd have to multiply that by 1,000 to even get a fraction of how difficult it can be raising a hormonal teenage girl. We both laugh and turn back to our lunch. The food was still good, but the company had vastly improved from our last visit.